It is a sound that defines an era. Four voices, woven together in a tapestry of perfect, sun-drenched harmony. A soprano, a tenor, a baritone, and a powerhouse alto, blending into a single golden frequency. To the ear, it sounds like optimism. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like the promise of the West Coast, broadcasting a siren song to every freezing kid in America to pack up their bags and head for the sunshine. When California Dreamin' hit the airwaves in early 1966, it didn't just climb the charts. It colonized the American imagination. The Mamas and the Papas, John, Michelle, Denny, and Cass, became the instant avatars of the hippie dream. They looked like a new kind of family, a tribe of bohemians draped in fur and denim, smiling beatifically from album covers, radiating peace, love, and understanding. But the sound was a lie. The harmony that captivated the world was a mask. Beneath those angelic vocals lay a reality so toxic, so incestuous, and so fraught with betrayal that it makes the dramas of Fleetwood Mac look like a schoolyard squabble. This was not a band built on brotherhood. It was a band built on a twisted geometric shape of unrequited love, manipulation, and addiction. John Phillips, the band's tall, imposing leader, was a musical genius, a master arranger who treated the voices of his bandmates like keys on a synthesizer. He was also a control freak who orchestrated the lives of the others with a chilling precision. Michelle Phillips was the teenage beauty queen, the muse who inspired the hits by breaking the hearts of the men singing them. Denny Doherty was the golden-voiced tenor, tortured by a forbidden love for his best friend's wife. And Cass Elliot was the beating heart of the group, the most talented singer of them all, trapped in a cycle of unrequited love for Denny, perpetually marginalized by the industry's cruel standards of beauty. They sold the world a dream of free love and community. In reality, they were a pressure cooker of jealousy and rage, fueled by a mountain of drugs and alcohol. They sang about California dreamin', but they were living a California nightmare. This is the story of how four broken people created the most beautiful sound of the 1960s. It is the anatomy of a pop culture myth, dismantled piece by piece. It is the story of how the song that defined the summer of love was actually forged in the freezing cold of a winter of discontent. This is the complicated, ugly, and brilliant truth of the Mamas and the Papas. To understand the volatile chemistry of the Mamas and the Papas, you have to go back to the laboratory where it was mixed, the freezing, gritty streets of Greenwich Village, New York, in 1964. This was not the glamorous music business of today. This was a world of walk-up apartments, cheap wine, and the fading embers of the folk revival. The village was a small town. Everyone knew everyone, and at the center of this incestuous scene was John Phillips. John was 28 years old, a former military brat, tall, thin, and radiating an intensity that people found either charismatic or terrifying. He was a veteran of the folk scene, a musical intellectual who understood harmony and structure better than almost anyone. He had recently married Michelle Gilliam, a breathtakingly beautiful 18-year-old model from California. Their marriage was the first pivot point of the band's dynamic. John was the teacher, Michelle was the student. He molded her. He taught her how to sing, how to perform. But he also possessed her. Enter Denny Doherty. Denny was a Canadian with a voice like liquid gold, a tenor so pure and effortless it seemed to defy gravity. He had come out of the same folk scene, a member of a group called the Mugwumps. When John Phillips met Denny, he knew he had found his musical alter ego. He courted Denny for his new group, the New Journeymen. But when Denny met Michelle, the dynamic shifted tectonically. It was instant, electric attraction. Denny was the fun, handsome, easygoing counterpart to John's intense, brooding intellectualism. Michelle was the wildest spirit in the village. The three of them became inseparable. They lived together, sang together, and partied together. And then there was the fourth element, the outlier, Cass Elliot. Cass was a force of nature. She was funny, incredibly intelligent, and possessed a voice of staggering power and bluesy depth. She had been in the mugwumps with Denny. She was in love with Denny. It was an open secret. She adored him with a puppy-dog devotion that was painful to witness. But Denny only had eyes for Michelle. And Michelle was married to John. And John needed Denny. This was the sexual geometry that defined the band before they played a single note. Cass loved Denny. Denny loved Michelle. Michelle was married to John, and John loved the sound they made together. In early 1965, seeking to escape the New York winter and forge their sound, this dysfunctional quartet, along with a few others initially, fled to the U.S. Virgin Islands. They camped out on the island of St. John. This trip, often romanticized, was actually a grueling boot camp. They were broke. They were living in tents on the beach. They ran out of money and eventually had to rely on the charity of the island's governor to eat. But in that isolation, stripped of distractions, John Phillips went to work. He became a drill sergeant. He pushed them relentlessly. He realized that by combining his specific arranging style, open, wide-voiced harmonies, with their unique vocal timbres, he could create something new. He placed Michelle's light soprano at the top, his own baritone at the bottom, and let Denny and Cass fill the middle with that rich, powerful texture. It was here, on a beach in the Caribbean, amidst sand fleas and hunger, that the mamas and the papas sound was born. They learned to breathe together. They learned to phrase together. They created a sonic blend so tight that it sounded like a single instrument. But the personal drama didn't stop. It accelerated. It was on this trip that the tension between Denny and Michelle finally snapped. They began a secret affair, right under John's nose. They were sleeping together, then waking up and singing love songs written by the husband Michelle was betraying. The guilt was immense. Denny Doherty later described the feeling. John was my best friend. I loved the guy. And here I am, sleeping with his wife. And Cass is in love with me. It was a mess. Yet John Phillips, with his eerie radar for human weakness, sensed it. And rather than breaking up the band, he did something darker. He used it. He began to write songs that weren't just melodies. They were interrogations. He channeled the tension in the air into the music itself. By the time they scraped together the money to fly to Los Angeles in mid-1965, they were a fully formed musical weapon. They were tight. They were hungry. And they were carrying enough emotional baggage to sink an ocean liner. They arrived in L.A. not as wide-eyed innocents, but as a hardened unit of musical mercenaries, ready to conquer the world, even if it meant destroying each other in the process. They arrived in Los Angeles in mid-1965, not as conquering heroes, but as refugees. They were broke, exhausted, and existing on the fringes of the industry. The California dream they would soon sell to the world was, at that moment, a grim reality of cheap motels and borrowed money. But they had a weapon. They had the songs John Phillips had ruthlessly drilled into them during their island exile. And they had a connection. Enter Barry McGuire. McGuire was a rough-voiced folk rock singer who had just scored a massive apocalyptic #1 hit with Eve of Destruction He was the hottest thing in protest music. He was also an old friend from the village scene. He heard the quartet sing, and he knew instantly that he was holding a winning lottery ticket. He told them to come to his record label, Dunhill Records. He told them to meet the man who ran it, the uncrowned king of the Sunset Strip, Lou Adler. Lou Adler was not your typical record executive. He didn't wear suits. He wore bespoke caps and designer tracksuits. He operated out of a dark, vibe-heavy office filled with incense and velvet. He had a golden ear, a shark's instinct for a hit, and the marketing genius to sell it. The audition took place in Adler's office. The band, nervous and hungry, literally and metaphorically, stood in a semicircle. John Phillips counted them in. They closed their eyes and unleashed that sound. That massive, vibrating four-part harmony that sounded like a church choir singing rock and roll. Adler didn't just hear music. He heard money. He heard a brand. He famously told his partners, "Don't let them leave the room without a contract." He saw the visual potential immediately. The thin, intense husband, the stunning model wife, the handsome tenor, and the larger-than-life Earth Mother figure of Cass. It was a cast of characters. He signed them on the spot. But they needed a debut single. And here lies one of the great ironies of pop history. The song that would define them, California Dreamin', wasn't originally meant for them. It was a cast-off. John Phillips had written the song back in New York, during a miserable, freezing winter night at the Hotel Earl. He was dreaming of the warmth of the West Coast. He woke up Michelle in the middle of the night to help him finish it. It was a song about longing, about being cold and miserable, and wishing you were somewhere else. When they got to the studio, however, they weren't recording it as their own single. They were recording backing vocals for Barry Maguire. Maguire wanted to record the song for his own album. He laid down a gravelly, rough lead vocal. The mamas and the papas did their intricate background parts. The session musicians, the legendary Wrecking Crew, including Hal Blaine on drums and Larry Knechtel on keyboards, laid down the instrumental track. But Lou Adler listened to the playback, and he heard something else. He heard the ghost of a smash hit hiding behind Maguire's voice. He realized the backing vocals were stronger than the lid. In a ruthless act of industry pragmatism, he decided to erase the star. He brought the mamas and the papas back into the studio. He told Denny Doherty to sing the lead vocal, but, and this is the secret that audiophiles have whispered about for decades, they didn't re-record the instruments. To save money and time, they simply wiped Barry Maguire's voice from the tape and recorded Denny singing over the exact same backing track. If you listen to the original vinyl release of California Dreamin' on headphones, in the split second before Denny sings "All the Leaves Are Brown," you can faintly hear the ghost of Barry Maguire singing the same line, bleeding through the other microphones. The anthem of the California Dream was literally built on top of someone else's erased performance. Then came the final stroke of genius, the solo. The song had an instrumental break, but it felt empty. In the studio that day was Bud Shank, a jazz legend, a man who played the flute and saxophone with a cool, West Coast breezy style. Normally, a pop song would feature a guitar solo or a saxophone solo. John Phillips asked for a flute. Bud Shank walked into the booth. He listened to the track once, and then, in a single take, he played that haunting, breathy, improvisational solo. It wasn't rock, it wasn't folk, it was jazz. It was mournful and chilly, perfectly capturing the winter's day feeling of the lyrics. It gave the song a texture of sophistication and melancholy that separated it from every other pop song on the radio. The song was released in December 1965. It was a slow burn at first, but then it exploded. It resonated perfectly with a nation of teenagers stuck in the snow, dreaming of a better, warmer, freer life. It hit number 4 on the Billboard charts, but its cultural impact was number 1. It established the California myth as the dominant narrative of the late 60s. Suddenly, the Mamas and the Papas were the biggest band in America. They moved into a mansion in Bel Air once owned by Jeanette MacDonald. They bought Porsches. They threw lavish parties attended by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. They became the royalty of Laurel Canyon. But as the money poured in and the cameras flashed, the toxic geometry of their relationships was tightening like a noose. The song was about dreaming of warmth, but inside the band, the temperature was dropping fast. The affair between Michelle and Denny, once a secret thrill on a Caribbean beach, was now a dangerous fault line running beneath a multi-million-dollar corporation. And John Phillips, the man who controlled the music, the money, and the lyrics, was watching it all, taking notes and sharpening his pen. He was about to turn their personal lives into their next number 1 hit. By 1966, the Mamas and the Papas were living inside a fortress of their own making. They occupied the old Jeanette MacDonald mansion in Bel Air, a sprawling estate that became a commune for the rock elite. The Beatles came to visit. The Rolling Stones dropped by. It was a non-stop party of drugs, money, and status. But inside the house, the walls were closing in. John Phillips knew about the affair, or at least he suspected it enough to turn it into art. He began to use the recording studio not just as a place of business, but as a torture chamber. He wrote songs that forced his bandmates to sing about their own betrayals, harmonies that required them to look each other in the eye while confessing their sins. The most brutal example of this was the song, "I Saw Her Again." On the surface, it's a catchy, driving pop tune with a great hook, but the backstory is a masterclass in psychological warfare. John Phillips co-wrote the song with Denny Doherty. The two men, the husband and the lover, sat down to write a song about the woman they were both sleeping with. Denny would later recall the agony of it. He was guilty, he was heartbroken, and he was being manipulated by John to put those feelings into a melody. The lyrics are a confession of helplessness. I saw her again last night, and you know that I shouldn't. To string her along's just not right. If I couldn't, I wouldn't. John then arranged the song so that Denny had to sing the lead. He made the man who was betraying him sing about the betrayal over and over again until they got the perfect take. And then, in a moment of studio serendipity that John refused to fix, there's a mistake at the 2:42 mark. You can hear Denny start to sing, I Saw Her, too early, before the rest of the band comes in. It's a false start, a moment of eagerness. In any other session, that mistake would be erased. John Phillips kept it in. He pushed it up in the mix. Why? Because it sounded like obsession. It sounded like Denny couldn't help himself. It immortalized Denny's lack of control. Every time that song played on the radio and it went to number 5 on the charts, Denny Doherty had to hear his own mistake, his own guilt, broadcast to the nation. The tension finally exploded in June 1966. The trigger wasn't the affair with Denny. That had become a twisted part of the group's equilibrium. The trigger was Gene Clark. Michelle Phillips, restless and feeling controlled by John, began an affair with Gene Clark, the founding member of the Byrds. This was too much for John. An affair inside the band he could manage, manipulate, and monetize. An affair outside the band was a threat to his control. John Phillips did the unthinkable. He fired his own wife. He convened a meeting with Denny and Cass. He presented them with legal papers. He told them that Michelle was out, and in a testament to his absolute power over them, Denny and Cass, who loved Michelle, signed the papers. They chose the band over the person. Michelle was served with a letter ejecting her from the Mamas and the Papas. It was a brutal corporate excommunication. To replace her, they hired Jill Gibson, a producer's girlfriend who looked somewhat like Michelle. They tried to wipe Michelle from history. They re-recorded her vocals on the upcoming album. They took publicity photos with Jill. They tried to pretend that the mama in the group was interchangeable. But the public didn't buy it. And more importantly, the sound wasn't there. That specific magical overtone created by Michelle's soprano and Cass's alto was gone. The family was broken. The fans at concerts screamed, "Where's Michelle?" After a few months of disastrous morale and lukewarm reception, John Phillips relented. He realized that the chemistry of the band was more important than his marital vengeance. Michelle was invited back. But the innocence, if there ever was any, was completely gone. She returned not as a wife, but as an employee, a contracted player in a band that was now a business first and a family second. Amidst this chaos, Cass Elliot stood as the tragic anchor. She was the most talented singer in the group, the one with the charisma to charm millions on television specials. But she was perpetually marginalized by John, who mocked her weight and controlled her musical output. And she was forced to watch Denny, the man she loved, destroy himself over Michelle. It was Cass who brokered the band's most culturally significant moment, the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. John Phillips was one of the organizers, and he used the festival to cement the band's legacy. They closed the show, performing California Dreamin' to a crowd that represented the peak of the summer of love. They looked perfect. They sounded perfect. They were the kings and queens of the counterculture. But watching the footage now, you see the cracks. You see the distance in their eyes. You see four people who are exhausted by each other. They were selling a dream of togetherness while living a nightmare of isolation. The ultimate testament to this era is their autobiographical masterpiece, Creek Alley. It's a humorous, jaunty folk rock song that tells the story of how the band formed. It name-checks all their friends: John Sebastian, Zal Yanofsky, Roger McGuinn. It chronicles their failures, their time in the Virgin Islands, their weight gain, their poverty. It ends with the triumphant line, "And reality's only a scant dream away, and getting fat's getting wealthy, and California's getting cold." It was meant to be a funny, self-deprecating history lesson. But in hindsight, the line, "California's getting cold," was the truest thing they ever sang. The warmth was leaving the music. The drugs were getting harder. Cocaine and heroin were replacing marijuana and LSD. The relationships were becoming purely transactional. The summer of love was ending, and the winter of their discontent was just beginning. The summer of love in 1967 was the peak. It was the moment the Mamas and the Papas stood on top of the world, orchestrating the counterculture from a VIP tent. But gravity, in the form of ego, addiction, and exhaustion, was about to assert itself. The descent wasn't a slow slide. It was a cliff-edge drop. The first crack in the foundation appeared later that same year. The band went to England to perform at the Royal Albert Hall. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it was a fiasco. Cass Elliot, feeling the pressure of her role and John's controlling grip, arrived in London and was promptly arrested for allegedly stealing towels from a hotel on a previous visit. The charges were dropped, but the humiliation was public. Then came the disastrous attempt at a fourth album, The Papas and the Mamas, 1968. The magic had evaporated. The sessions were conducted in John Phillips's home studio, which he had built to avoid the structured discipline of professional studios like Western recorders. This was a mistake. Without the clock ticking, without Lou Adler keeping them focused, the sessions descended into a drug-fueled haze. The songs were disjointed, the harmonies lacked their trademark shimmer, and the joy was visibly absent. They were no longer a band. They were four rich people trapped in a house, trying to recreate a feeling they had murdered. The tensions between John, Michelle, and Denny had become a toxic stalemate. But the true tragedy began to center on Cass. Cass Elliot wanted to be a solo star. She had the voice, she had the personality, and she had the ambition. In 1968, she officially quit the group. She signed a massive solo deal. She was booked for a 2-week residency at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, a move that was supposed to announce her arrival as the new Barbra Streisand. It was a catastrophe. Cass, driven by the pressure to conform to traditional beauty standards, had gone on a crash diet, losing a massive amount of weight in a short time. Her body was weak. Her voice, her greatest instrument, was damaged by the strain. On opening night, she had a high fever. She walked onto the stage at Caesar's Palace, the spotlight hitting her, and opened her mouth to sing. Nothing came out but a croak. She tried to push through, but the reviews were savage. The industry that had tolerated her size as long as she was the funny one in a group turned on her the moment she tried to stand alone as a diva. The show was canceled after one night. It was a public humiliation that haunted her. It shattered the illusion of the Mama Cass persona, the happy Earth Mother figure. The reality was a woman struggling for respect in an industry that valued image over talent. The band limpingly reunited in 1971 for one final album, People Like Us, solely because their contracts demanded it. The music was forgettable, the sound of a contractual obligation. They were ghosts singing in a room together, their eyes fixed on the exit. The personal lives of the members mirrored the professional collapse. John Phillips slid deeper into severe heroin addiction, a darkness that would consume him for the next decade. Michelle Phillips moved into acting, distancing herself from the music world. Denny Doherty, the man with the golden voice, drifted into alcoholism, never quite escaping the shadow of the unrequited love triangle that had defined his youth. And then, the final, irrevocable silence. In 1974, Cass Elliot was in London. She had rebuilt her career. She had a successful television special. She had just played a sold-out, triumphant 2-week run at the London Palladium. She was finally getting the respect she deserved as a solo artist. She called Michelle Phillips, ecstatic, telling her that she had finally made it on her own terms. That night, Cass Elliot died in her sleep from heart failure. She was 32 years old. The rumors that followed, the cruel urban legend about a ham sandwich, were the final insult. The press, unable to grant her dignity even in death, reduced her to a punchline about her weight. The truth was simpler and sadder. Her heart, strained by years of crash diets, stress, and the sheer weight of carrying the emotional burden of the band, simply gave out. With Cass gone, the mamas and the papas were truly dead. The voice that provided the warmth, the glue that held the harmonies together, was silenced. The California dream was over. When we look back at the mamas and the papas today, we see a perfect frozen image of 1960s idealism. We see the caftans, the hats, the smiles. We hear Monday, Monday and California Dreamin', and we hear the sound of a generation waking up to possibility. But the true legacy of the band is found in the disconnect between that sound and their reality. They were the ultimate illusionists. They took their pain, their jealousy, their addictions, and their betrayals, and they polished them until they shone like gold. John Phillips, the architect, proved that you could build a pop empire on a foundation of manipulation. He wrote the soundtrack for A Summer of Love that he was too cynical to actually believe in. He created a utopian image while running his band like a dictatorship. Michelle Phillips, the survivor, proved that beauty could be a weapon and a shield. She navigated the chaos, broke the rules, and walked away when the house caught fire. Denny Doherty, the soul, proved that the most beautiful voice can hide the saddest heart. He carried the melody, but he also carried the burden of the secret that destroyed them. And Cass Elliot. Cass proved that talent is the only thing that matters, even if the world refuses to see it. She was the real mama, the source of the warmth that made the songs endure. Without her, the harmonies were just math. With her, they were magic. California Dreamin' is not a happy song. Listen to it again. It's in a minor key. It's about being cold. It's about being safe and warm in a church, and then leaving that safety to go out into the winter. It's a song about running away. The mamas and the papas spent their entire career running away. They ran from New York to the Virgin Islands. They ran to California. They ran from their marriages. They ran from themselves. And for a brief, shining moment, the sound of their running created a harmony so beautiful that it fooled the world. They sold us a dream of California that didn't exist. A dream where love is free, where the sun always shines, and where you can always find your way home. But as their story proves, you can check out anytime you like, but the winter always follows you. The California dream was a beautiful lie, but it was a lie we all wanted to believe. And 50 years later, when that flute solo hits, we still do. The history of pop culture is built on these beautiful deceptions. If you want to keep peeling back the layers, exploring the dark truths behind the bright lights, and understanding the real stories of the songs you know by heart, hit that subscribe button. The music is just the beginning.